Ibrahim Traoré bids farewell to Burkina, with a letter that breaks millions of hearts. The grand hall of the Kosiam Palace buzzed with anticipation. Ministers, military officials, tribal leaders, journalists, and selected citizens from all corners of Burkina Faso filled the ornate chamber to capacity. The afternoon sun filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the marble floor, where the nation's emblem was proudly displayed. Outside, the streets of Ouagadougou were unusually quiet, as if the capital itself was holding its breath. Rumors had spread throughout the day that President Ibrahim Traoré had called for this extraordinary assembly, though no official agenda had been announced. At precisely 4 o'clock, the side doors opened. The customary announcement was made, but the usual fanfare was conspicuously absent. Ibrahim Traoré entered with measured steps, wearing a traditional hand-woven Faso Danfani cloth in the colors of the national flag. At just 37 years old, he remained the world's youngest head of state. Yet today he carried himself with the gravity of someone twice his age. Those closest to the aisle noticed the slight tremor in his hands, so uncharacteristic for a man known for his unwavering resolve on the battlefield. "What's wrong with him?" whispered an elderly journalist to his colleague. "I've never seen him like this." The young president approached the podium, scanning the room slowly as if committing each face to memory. The chamber fell into a silence so complete that the distant call of a market vendor outside the palace walls could be heard. He placed his hands on either side of the microphone, steadying himself, then reached into his breast pocket and withdrew a single folded sheet of paper. The action itself sent ripples of whispers across the hall. Ibrahim Traoré never read from prepared statements. His speeches were always delivered from memory, straight from the heart, one of the qualities that had endeared him to the masses who saw in him echoes of Thomas Sankara, the revolutionary hero whose portrait hung prominently behind the podium. He unfolded the paper with deliberate care. The television cameras zoomed in, broadcasting this unusual moment to millions across the nation who had abandoned their afternoon activities to watch the unexpected address. In remote villages without electricity, people gathered around battery-powered radios. Children shushed as adults strained to hear. "Burkina Faso, my beloved people." His voice was softer than usual, charged with an emotion that caught many off guard. This was not the commanding tone of the president addressing his nation. This was the voice of a son of the soil speaking to his family. He paused, swallowed hard, and continued. "I stand before you today, not as your president, but as your brother, your son, your fellow citizen who shares your struggles, your dreams, and your unyielding spirit." The hall remained transfixed as he set aside the formalities of office to speak of his childhood in the dusty streets of Bondoukoui, where he had sat under the shade of ancient baobab trees, listening to village griots recount tales of ancestors who had resisted colonial powers. He spoke of his parents, his father, a humble farmer who taught him to respect the land, and his mother, who walked miles each day to sell vegetables so her children could attend school. "It was not in grand palaces or prestigious academies that I learned the meaning of dignity and courage," he said, his voice gathering strength. "It was in watching my father refuse bribes from land developers. It was in seeing my mother stand proud at the market even when wealthier women looked down upon her wares. It was in the quiet dignity of our people who have survived droughts, invasions, exploitation, and yet never surrendered their soul." As he spoke, the formal atmosphere in the hall transformed. Officials who had arrived expecting policy announcements or government reshuffling found themselves moved by the unexpected intimacy of their leader's words. Several ministers wiped away tears as Traoré recalled his early days in the military, not driven by ambition for power, but by a genuine desire to protect the vulnerable communities of the northern regions who suffered most from jihadist insurgencies. "I did not seek this position," he continued, gesturing to the presidential seal. "Each step I took was guided by necessity, by duty, by love for a land that deserves to determine its own destiny." Then, after nearly 30 minutes of personal reflection that had captivated the audience, he carefully folded his hands over the podium and delivered the words that would soon ripple across the nation like a shockwave. My cherished compatriots, during the coming days, I must temporarily leave our beloved country. I do not do this lightly. I do not do this for myself. I go for you, for us, for the future generations who will inherit the Burkina Faso we are building together. A collective gasp swept through the hall. Even his closest advisors looked at each other in confusion. This announcement had been shared with only a handful of security personnel. In the press section, journalists frantically typed on their phones, breaking the news to a nation unprepared for such a declaration. I ask for your understanding, he continued, his voice steady despite the visible consternation spreading through the audience. I ask for your trust. Just as a father sometimes must journey far to secure provisions for his family, I too must undertake this mission with the sole purpose of strengthening our nation's position in a world that has too often relegated us to the margins. As murmurs began to rise from various corners of the hall, Ibrahim Traoré raised his hand requesting silence. The room complied immediately, eager to understand what extraordinary circumstances would necessitate their young leader's departure at such a critical time in the nation's history. Tomorrow I will share with you the specific purpose of my journey, he promised. Today I needed you to hear first from my heart, not from official communiques or diplomatic channels. Because before I am your president, I am a son of this soil, a child of the Sahel, a boy from Bobo Dioulasso who never forgot the lessons taught under the village baobab. As he stepped back from the podium, the hall erupted not in the typical, polite applause that followed official addresses, but in a spontaneous chorus of voices calling his name. Ibrahim, Ibrahim, they chanted, many standing, reaching toward him as if their collective will could keep him from whatever journey he was preparing to undertake. Walking toward the exit, surrounded by his security detail, Traoré paused briefly at the door, turned back to face the crowd one last time and placed his hand over his heart in a gesture of profound connection that transcended words. In that silent moment, something unspoken passed between the young leader and his people. A promise, a covenant, a shared understanding that whatever was coming would test the very foundations of their national identity. The following morning, an unusual stillness hung over Ouagadougou. Markets opened late as vendors first gathered around radios, waiting for the promised explanation. Schools reported record attendance, not because of any particular academic event, but because families wanted their children to be where news could be readily shared and discussed. The usual morning traffic jams dissipated as drivers kept their radios tuned to national broadcasts, often pulling over when important announcements came through. By noon, the Kosiam Palace was once again filled, though this time the atmosphere carried a distinct tension. Security had been doubled with elite soldiers from the Presidential Guard positioned at every entrance and along the perimeter walls. Foreign diplomats, notably absent from the previous day's gathering, now occupied the front row, their faces revealing nothing of what they might already know. When Ibrahim Traoré entered, he wore his military uniform rather than civilian attire, a deliberate choice that did not go unnoticed. He approached the podium with the disciplined posture of his military training, but his eyes carried the same emotional weight as the day before. People of Burkina Faso, he began, this time without notes or paper. I know my announcement yesterday has caused concern and speculation. Today I come with clarity and purpose. He gripped the sides of the podium, his knuckles whitening slightly under the pressure. I will be absent from our nation for exactly 7 days, not 1 day more. During this time I remain your president. I remain in command. But for this brief period, I must serve as the feet and voice of our people beyond our borders. The directness of his time frame brought visible relief to many faces in the audience. A week seemed manageable, predictable, containable. The foreign diplomats exchanged glances, their previously impassive expressions betraying faint surprise at this specific detail. Since taking office after our necessary political transition, we have faced challenges that would break lesser nations, Traoré continued, his voice gaining strength. We have fought terrorism on our northern borders, while international powers watched from a distance, offering sympathy but limited practical support. We have struggled with food insecurity as climate change ravages our agricultural lands. We have endured diplomatic pressures and economic threats from those who claim to be allies, but expect obedience in return for their assistance. Several Western diplomats shifted uncomfortably in their seats as Traoré's gaze swept over the front row. Through all this, the people of Burkina Faso have shown extraordinary resilience. Our farmers have adapted ancestral techniques to changing weather patterns. Our soldiers have defended remote villages with limited resources but unlimited courage. Our youth have created technological solutions that address uniquely African challenges. He paused, allowing his words to resonate throughout the hall and across the airwaves to the most distant corners of the nation. Yet we remain constrained by systems not of our making. I have been criticized, both within our borders and beyond, for seeking new partnerships with nations that respect our sovereignty. I have been labeled a radical for suggesting that Burkina Faso's resources should primarily benefit Burkina Faso's people. I have been called naive for believing that African solutions are the answer to African problems. A ripple of supportive murmurs spread through the local audience as several ministers nodded emphatically. The foreign diplomats maintained their professional composure, though some made notes on small pads or discrete devices. Let me be absolutely clear. Traoré's voice hardened, revealing the steel beneath his usually measured tone. Our independence is not negotiable. Our dignity is sacred. The path we choose may not be the one others would select for us, but it is ours to determine. He stepped away from the podium and moved to the edge of the stage, reducing the distance between himself and the audience in a gesture that symbolized his connection to the people. My brief absence is necessary to secure opportunities that cannot be negotiated from a distance. In this modern age, much can be accomplished through video calls and diplomatic channels, but some doors only open when you knock in person. Some conversations must happen eye to eye, with the soil of our ancestors on your boots and their wisdom in your words. As he spoke, a shaft of sunlight broke through the high windows, illuminating his figure against the backdrop of the national flag, a moment so visually powerful that photographers instinctively captured it, creating what would become an iconic image in the nation's visual history. Sometimes to serve is to depart briefly, to return with greater strength. To love one's country is to endure temporary separation for the promise of a stronger reunion. The explanation, while emotionally resonant, still lacked specific details about his destination or the exact nature of his mission. This deliberate vagueness was not lost on the audience, particularly the more politically savvy among them who understood the strategic value of ambiguity in international relations. Defense. Minister Captain Traoré Mahamadou rose from his seat and approached the podium. The two men embraced in the traditional manner, a gesture broadcast across the nation that signaled continuity of leadership and mutual trust. This choreographed moment reassured many that the president's absence would not create a power vacuum or trigger instability. During my absence, Captain Mahamadou will oversee daily security operations. Prime Minister Dr. Apollinaire Joachimson Kielem de Tambela will continue coordinating all government functions. The cabinet remains intact and fully operational. Traoré named several other officials who would take on specific responsibilities, emphasizing that governance would proceed without interruption. He turned his attention to addressing potential concerns about security risks during his absence. Let me speak directly to those who might see this temporary situation as an opportunity for disruption. His tone dropped to a stern warning. Our intelligence services remain vigilant. Our military stands ready. Any attempt to exploit this brief period will be met with the full force of our national defense apparatus. The implied message to potential destabilizing forces, whether terrorist, groups in the north, or political opportunists within the capital, was unmistakable. To those who will inevitably spread rumors and misinformation during my absence, he continued with a knowing smile that drew light laughter from the audience. I remind you that in the age of instant communication, I remain connected to every development within our borders. Distance cannot separate me from the pulse of our nation. As he concluded this portion of his address, an elderly griot, a traditional storyteller and keeper of oral history, rose from his seat at the back of the hall. Though not planned in the official program, the president nodded respectfully, granting him permission to speak. The spontaneous moment captured the blend of formal governance and cultural tradition that characterized Traoré's leadership style. Our ancestors tell us, the griot's voice carried surprisingly well despite his age, that a hunter who never leaves the village will never bring meat to the communal pot. A leader who never crosses boundaries brings no new alliances to strengthen the community. The traditional wisdom, offered in support of the president's decision, resonated deeply with the audience. Ibrahim Traoré bowed his head slightly in acknowledgement of this cultural validation, demonstrating his respect for indigenous knowledge systems alongside modern governance structures. "I thank our elder for this wisdom," Traoré responded. "Indeed, sometimes one must journey outward to better serve what is within. My mission is brief, but what we will build during these 7 days will serve generations to come." As the afternoon session continued, the atmosphere in the grand hall transformed from tension to collective purpose. Ibrahim Traoré moved away from justifying his departure and began outlining what he hoped to accomplish during his week abroad. His posture straightened, his voice gained resonance, and the leader who had emerged from quiet reflections now stood as a man with a mission. "The time has come for complete transparency about the purpose of my journey," he announced, commanding full attention. "I have been invited to participate in a historic summit of progressive African leaders. Not the kind that makes headlines in Western media, but the kind that is reshaping the continent from within." A collective murmur rippled through the crowd, as speculations were confirmed or dismissed. Foreign journalists frantically typed on their devices, recognizing the significance of this revelation. This gathering will lay the groundwork for a sovereign African alliance focused on 3 critical pillars: food security, energy independence, and technological self-reliance. Traoré's voice rose with conviction. "For too long, our continent has been a consumer of others' innovations, a market for others' products, a laboratory for others' experiments. This ends now." He outlined how the summit would bring together nations with complementary resources, agricultural powerhouses, countries with significant mineral deposits, states with advanced technological institutions, to create a framework for mutual support outside the influence of former colonial powers. "I do not go to listen to speeches or offer empty platitudes," he insisted, pounding his fist lightly on the podium. "I go to negotiate concrete agreements. I go to fight for our interests. I go to secure partnerships that respect our sovereignty while advancing our development." The specificity of his objectives brought visible approval from government ministers and civil society representatives alike. Even some of the foreign diplomats appeared impressed by the clarity and ambition of the vision, though others maintained skeptical expressions. Traoré then revealed that while the summit itself would last 3 days, the remaining time would be devoted to bilateral meetings with specific partner nations, though he strategically avoided naming them, keeping certain cards close to his chest. These discussions will focus on immediate needs: military equipment for our anti-terrorism operations, agricultural technology to combat desertification, and educational partnerships to build our human capital. He walked across the stage as he spoke, emphasizing different points with measured gestures that reflected his military training. "Every minute I spend away from Burkina Faso will be in service to Burkina Faso." He then addressed practical governance matters during his absence, assuring the nation that he had methodically prepared for this temporary transition. "This mission was not planned hastily or in reaction to any crisis," he explained. "For months, my team and I have carefully arranged every detail, considering all contingencies and establishing clear protocols for decision-making in my absence." To demonstrate this preparedness, he invited key cabinet members to briefly outline their specific responsibilities during the coming week. The defense minister detailed security protocols, the foreign affairs minister explained diplomatic continuity, and the information minister described communication strategies to keep citizens informed without revealing sensitive details that could compromise the president's security abroad. This orchestrated presentation effectively conveyed that governance would continue seamlessly, a crucial message in a region where leadership transitions, even temporary ones, often triggered instability. The careful choreography also reflected Traoré's background as a strategic military officer, approaching national leadership with the same methodical planning he had applied in battlefield operations. "While I am absent physically, our government functions without interruption," he assured. "Daily security briefings will continue. Cabinet meetings will proceed as scheduled. Development projects under construction will advance without delay." After establishing these practical assurances, Traoré shifted to a more forward-looking portion of his address, revealing a previously confidential initiative that would commence during his time abroad. "I can now share with you a project we have developed in silence for many months," he announced with visible pride. "Beginning next week, the first cohort of 200 young Burkina scholars will depart for specialized training in engineering, agriculture, medicine, and digital technology at partner institutions across Africa and beyond." This announcement drew spontaneous applause, as educational opportunities represented a tangible investment in the nation's future that resonated across political divisions. These young minds, selected from every region of our country based on merit alone, will return with knowledge and skills to address our most pressing challenges. They represent our greatest natural resource, the intelligence and determination of our youth. He explained that the agreements to make this educational initiative possible would be formalized during his upcoming journey, connecting his personal mission directly to the aspirations of ordinary families throughout the nation. "Each of these students comes from humble backgrounds just as I did," he noted, creating a personal connection to the program. "Many are the first in their families to complete secondary education. All have demonstrated exceptional abilities, despite limited resources." The focus on education struck a particularly resonant chord in a country where access to quality learning remained a persistent challenge, especially in rural areas. By highlighting this initiative, Traoré effectively shifted the narrative around his absence from potential concern to anticipated opportunity. "When people ask why I must leave, even briefly," he continued, "I think of these young scholars and countless others who will follow. Every diplomatic handshake, every agreement signed, every alliance formed beyond our borders translates directly to opportunities within them." He then broadened his perspective to situate Burkina Faso within the larger context of African and global politics, addressing the international dimensions of his mission. "We have reached a pivotal moment in our nation's development," he declared. "For decades after independence, African leaders were expected to be passive recipients of foreign aid, grateful supplicants at international conferences. Today, we enter those same rooms as equals, with clear demands and alternatives if those demands are not met." This assertion of diplomatic equality drew the most enthusiastic response yet from the audience, many rising to their feet in approval. The foreign diplomats observed this reaction carefully, undoubtedly preparing their own reports about the political climate. "The respect Burkina Faso now commands in international forums has been hard-won," Traoré acknowledged. "We are no longer viewed as merely participants. We are recognized as leaders with distinct perspectives that cannot be ignored." He compared his diplomatic mission to the role of traditional messengers in pre-colonial African societies, trusted individuals who carried not just words, but the very essence of their community's values and needs to neighboring territories. "I travel as your messenger," he said, touching his chest. "I carry our soil in my skin. I carry our voice on my lips. I carry our struggles in my heart, and our dreams in my vision." The imagery resonated deeply, particularly with older audience members who recognized the cultural significance of the messenger role in West African traditions. "This is merely 1 week," he concluded this portion of his address, his voice now filled with certainty and purpose. "But what we build in these 7 days will serve our children for generations. The alliances formed, the agreements signed, the bridges constructed between our nation and strategic partners will outlast any single administration or policy." He looked out across the hall, making eye contact with citizens from various walks of life who had been invited to witness this historic moment. "When I return to you in 7 days, I will bring not promises but concrete achievements, not theories but practical solutions. Not words but actions that will move our beloved Burkina Faso forward on the path of true independence and sustainable prosperity. As the afternoon light began to wane, casting long shadows across the grand hall, Ibrahim Traoré's address took an unexpected turn. The formal announcements complete, the practical arrangements explained, he now seemed to shed the mantle of presidential authority to speak from a more personal place. "Before I conclude today's assembly," he said, his voice softening, "I wish to share something more intimate with you, not as your president, but as a man who walks among you, who shares your joys and sorrows, who understands the weight of daily struggles in our beautiful but challenging land." He looked upward briefly, a gesture that did not go unnoticed by those familiar with local customs of acknowledging ancestors. "My father and mother, Allah grant them peace, did not live to see me in this position. Simple people with extraordinary dreams, they imagined a country where justice was not a luxury for the privileged few, but the birthright of every citizen, a nation where a farmer's child could rise not through connections or corruption, but through honest work and dedication to community." His mention of his parents humanized him in a way that resonated throughout the hall. In a culture where family, connections, and respect for elders remained paramount, this acknowledgement of his roots reinforced his identity as a son of the soil, despite his elevated position. "I grew up listening to stories, not of superheroes with impossible powers, but of real African resistors who stood against colonization, of women who protected their villages through drought and conflict, of elders who preserved our knowledge when others sought to erase it." His voice carried the rhythms of the traditional storytelling he referenced, creating a hypnotic quality that captivated the audience. These narratives shaped me more profoundly than any military academy or political theory. They taught me that power means nothing if not used to protect the vulnerable. That leadership is not about imposing one's will, but about carrying the hopes of the many. He paused, moving away from the podium to stand at the very edge of the stage, reducing the physical and symbolic distance between himself and the citizens. "During my years in military service, I witnessed unspeakable tragedies in the northern provinces. Villages burned by terrorists, children orphaned in an afternoon, elders who had preserved our traditions for generations murdered for refusing to abandon ancestral practices." His voice cracked slightly, revealing the emotional weight these memories still carried. "Each time we arrived too late to prevent such atrocities, I carried that failure personally. Each time we managed to protect a community, I understood more deeply that security is not abstract policy, but the fundamental right of every Burkinabe to sleep without fear." Many in the audience nodded in solemn understanding. The insurgency that had claimed thousands of lives and displaced over 2 million citizens was not a distant conflict but a daily reality that touched nearly every family in the nation. This is why I say to you today, power exists not for self-aggrandizement or personal enrichment. It exists as a sacred trust to protect those who cannot protect themselves, to amplify voices that would otherwise go unheard, to ensure that the child born in the most remote village has the same opportunity as one born in the capital. Several elderly women in traditional dress began a soft, rhythmic patting of hands, not quite applause, but a traditional form of approval that signaled deep resonance with his words. The sound spread gradually throughout the hall. "I have not always succeeded in this mission," he admitted, with disarming candor. "There have been nights when the weight of decisions made or delayed has kept me from sleep. When the gap between our national aspirations and our limited resources seemed too vast to bridge. When the inherited systems of governance proved resistant to necessary transformation." This acknowledgement of imperfection and struggle, rare for a leader in a position of such authority, created a palpable sense of authenticity that transcended political divides. Even opposition figures in attendance appeared moved by this display of vulnerability. "But in those moments of doubt, it was not to grand theories or foreign advisors that I turned," he continued. "It was to the wisdom of our market women who manage household economies with intelligence that would humble finance ministers. To the creativity of our youth who build technological solutions with minimal resources but maximum ingenuity. To the endurance of our farmers who read the changing climate not through scientific instruments, but through generations of accumulated knowledge. He spoke at length about specific communities he had visited, naming villages, individuals, initiatives that had inspired him throughout his leadership journey. This granular knowledge of local realities demonstrated a leader who remained connected to grassroots concerns despite his elevated position. When we opened the new technical school in Diebougou last year, an elderly man approached me as I was leaving. He had walked 12 kilometers to witness the ceremony. His hands, calloused from decades of agricultural labor, held mine as he said simply, "My grandchildren will have choices I never had." In that moment, I understood that our true legacy is not measured in grand monuments or speeches recorded for history, but in expanded possibilities for ordinary lives. Traoré then shifted to speak about education, not as policy but as personal transformation, recounting his own journey from village school to university, where his encounters with progressive thought and Pan-African philosophy had shaped his worldview. True independence begins with educational sovereignty, he asserted. A people who cannot produce their own knowledge, who cannot question received wisdom, who cannot innovate solutions specific to their context, remain colonized in the most fundamental sense, colonized in mind even if technically free in body. He connected this philosophical position to practical initiatives his government had undertaken: the construction of new schools in previously underserved regions, curriculum reforms that centered African contributions to world knowledge, and scholarship programs that enabled talented students from impoverished backgrounds to access higher education. "Everything I know of real value," he said with deep conviction, "I learned not from textbooks alone, but from you, from the market vendor who explained economic realities more clearly than any professor, from the village elder whose conflict resolution wisdom surpasses international diplomacy protocols, from the young activists whose vision for our future challenges my own thinking." As he approached the conclusion of this more personal segment, Ibrahim Traoré returned to the podium, symbolically resuming his formal role even as his words maintained their intimate quality. "My upcoming mission is brief in duration but eternal in its implications," he said softly. 7 days away from the land I love, from the people who have entrusted me with this sacred responsibility. But my love for Burkina Faso, for each of you, transcends physical presence. It infuses every negotiation, every agreement, every alliance I will forge on your behalf. He placed his hand over his heart in a gesture both universal and deeply local. "I carry you with me, not as an abstract concept of nationhood, but as individual faces, names, stories that comprise the tapestry of our collective identity. When I speak in distant chambers, it will be your voices that inform my words. When I sign agreements, it will be your future that guides my hand." The setting sun now cast the hall in amber light, creating an atmospheric backdrop that underscored the emotional resonance of the moment. A silence had fallen over the assembled crowd, not the tense silence of uncertainty that had marked the beginning of his address, but the reverent quiet of shared understanding. "Tomorrow, I depart physically from our soil, but in the ways that matter most, I remain always among you, of you for you. For this is not the journey of an individual, but the continued march of a nation toward the destiny our ancestors envisioned and our children deserve." The grand hall of Kosiam Palace now vibrated with an energy that transcended the formal proceedings of a state address. As Ibrahim Traoré approached the final portion of his speech, the entire audience rose to their feet in a spontaneous display of solidarity that crossed political, ethnic, and social divides. Tears flowed freely, from hardened military officers to seasoned diplomats, from village elders to university students invited to witness this historic moment. Traoré himself appeared momentarily overwhelmed by this outpouring of emotion, pausing to compose himself before continuing with renewed determination. "I stand before you humbled by your trust," he began, his voice gaining strength. "Let me be absolutely clear about something fundamental. I am not irreplaceable. I am merely one, part of a collective force called Burkina Faso. Our strength lies not in individual leadership, but in our shared commitment to national destiny." This statement, rare from a leader in a region where personality cults often overshadowed institutions, reflected Traoré's consistent emphasis on building systems rather than centralizing power. It resonated particularly with civil society, representatives who had long advocated for stronger democratic structures. During my absence, I will not be sequestered in luxurious palaces or engaging in symbolic photo opportunities, he continued with characteristic directness. I will be in negotiation rooms where real decisions affecting African futures are determined. I will be in technical meetings where resource allocations are finalized. I will be in strategic sessions where security partnerships are formalized. He then took a moment to acknowledge specific segments of Burkinabe society, creating a tapestry of inclusion that reinforced national unity at this pivotal moment. To our farmers, who rise before dawn to cultivate our land despite changing climate, patterns, and limited resources, you are the foundation of our sovereignty. A nation that cannot feed itself cannot truly claim independence. To our mothers who manage household economies with wisdom that would humble financial experts, who nurture not just children but community bonds, you are the moral compass of our society. To our soldiers who stand guard in remote outposts, far from family comforts, facing threats with limited equipment but unlimited courage, you embody the sacrifice that nationhood sometimes demands. To our teachers who shape future generations, with knowledge and values despite inadequate facilities and delayed salaries, you are building our tomorrow through each mind you cultivate today. Each acknowledgement drew enthusiastic response from the respective groups represented in the audience, creating waves of applause that built upon one another. By recognizing these diverse contributions to national life, Traoré effectively transformed his personal journey into a collective mission in which every citizen could see themselves reflected. He then addressed potential concerns about stability during his absence, confronting directly the anxieties that inevitably arise during leadership transitions in a region where such moments had historically created vulnerability. I urge you to remain vigilant during these 7 days, he cautioned. There will be those who attempt to use my physical absence to spread misinformation, to sow division, to create artificial crises that serve external interests. Do not allow falsehoods to divide what truth has united. The warning was delivered, not with paranoia, but with the pragmatic assessment of a leader who understood both internal and external threats to national cohesion. He outlined specific communication protocols that would be followed during his absence. Daily briefings from designated officials, authenticated updates on his mission, transparent information about government operations continuing in his absence. Trust only official channels, he advised. In this age of digital manipulation, verify before you amplify. Our enemies understand that perception can be weaponized as effectively as conventional arms. He then pivoted to more inspiring territory, sharing previously undisclosed details about development initiatives already underway that would continue, advancing during his absence. Tangible evidence of a government that functioned as a system rather than revolving around a single individual. While international attention focuses on my diplomatic mission, I want you to know about the progress continuing on home soil, he said with evident pride. The Samandeni Dam expansion that will irrigate an additional 50,000 hectares of agricultural land proceeds on schedule. The solar panel manufacturing facility in Bobo Dioulasso begins production next month, creating 800 jobs while advancing our energy independence. The technical training centers in Dori, Banfora, and Kudugu will welcome their first students in September, providing vocational skills aligned with our development priorities. These concrete examples of national progress, specific, verifiable, distributed across different regions, provided reassurance that the country's development trajectory would continue regardless of the president's temporary absence. Each project mentioned connected to fundamental priorities: food security, energy independence, human capital development. Our people have always transformed seemingly impossible challenges into hard-won victories, he observed. When colonial authorities claimed we lacked the capacity for self-governance, our ancestors proved otherwise. When international experts predicted our young democracy would collapse under security pressures, we adapted and endured. When financial institutions, doubted our ability to manage our resources independently, we developed alternative models of economic sovereignty. This framing of national resilience as a historical continuum, rather than a recent development, effectively placed current challenges within a longer narrative of persistence and self-determination that resonated deeply across generational lines. Traoré then outlined his expectations for the nation during his week abroad, establishing a covenant of mutual responsibility between leader and citizens. "When I return to Burkina soil in 7 days," he said, leaning forward intently, "I wish to find a nation even stronger than the one I temporarily leave, more vigilant against those who would undermine our sovereignty, more united in purpose, despite our beautiful diversity of perspectives, more conscious of the historical moment we collectively inhabit." He requested specific commitments from various sectors, asking businesses to maintain fair pricing during his absence, calling on media to practice responsible journalism, urging religious leaders to promote unity, encouraging youth to channel their energy into community service. This distributed responsibility reinforced the message that national stability depended not on a single leader, but on millions of daily choices by ordinary citizens. As he approached his conclusion, Traoré stepped away from the podium one final time, walking to the very edge of the stage to eliminate as much distance as possible between himself and the assembled representatives of the nation. "I depart for 7 days," he said, his voice now carrying the weight of both authority and intimate connection. "But I carry with me the responsibility of 7 million hearts. I negotiate not for personal legacy, but for children not yet born, who deserve to inherit a Burkina Faso that stands dignified among nations." The hall had fallen completely silent, the collective breath held as he delivered his final words. "Our journey as a nation did not begin with me, nor will it end with me," he stated with profound humility. "I am but one chapter in an epic narrative written by generations of Burkina dreamers and fighters. My temporary departure is simply a paragraph in that continuing story, necessary, purposeful, but ultimately in service to the larger text of our national becoming." He surveyed the room one last time, making eye contact with citizens from every walk of life, from military generals to market vendors, from traditional chiefs to university students. In that moment, the formal distinctions of status seemed to dissolve into a shared identity that transcended individual differences. "I ask you to remember who we are during these 7 days," Traoré said, his voice now carrying across the silent hall with crystalline clarity. "We are descendants of warriors who resisted colonial occupation. We are children of the land that nurtured Thomas Sankara's revolutionary vision. We are the guardians of traditions that survived centuries of external pressure. We are the architects of a future that refuses to replicate past dependencies." He paused, allowing these reminders of collective identity to resonate before delivering his final commitment. "My brothers and sisters, I depart tomorrow at dawn. For 7 days I will be physically distant but spiritually present in every village, every neighborhood, every home where Burkina hearts beat with love for this soil. I will return with new pathways for our journey, new tools for our development, new allies for our struggle." With a gesture both solemn and tender, he placed his right hand over his heart and extended his left toward the audience, a traditional symbol of giving one's essence while receiving collective strength. "I leave for 7 days," he concluded, his voice breaking slightly with emotion yet carrying unwavering resolve. "But I proudly bear the weight of 7 million hearts. Each step I take on foreign soil will be guided by your trust. Each word I speak in distant chambers will carry your collective wisdom. Each agreement I secure will serve not my administration, but generations of Burkina yet unborn." As he stepped back from the edge of the stage, the hall erupted in a thunderous response. Not merely applause, but a rhythmic beating of hands and feet that echoed ancient drumming patterns, transcending formal political protocol to express something more primal. A people unified in purpose despite the temporary absence of their chosen leader. Ibrahim Traoré stood tall, receiving this outpouring with visible emotion but maintained dignity. In this final moment before departing on his mysterious mission, The young captain who had reluctantly assumed leadership of a nation in crisis was transformed in the public imagination. No longer merely a transitional figure, but a symbol of renewed national possibility, a bridge between Burkina Faso's revolutionary past and its sovereign future. As he exited the hall, surrounded by his security detail yet somehow projecting solitary purpose, the spontaneous chant that followed him would be remembered for generations to come. Burkina say, Burkina forever, a promise of continuity that transcended the temporary absence of a single leader, affirming instead the permanence of a national journey that had begun long before him and would continue long after, strengthened rather than diminished by the week that would change everything.